In the final spring of the war, one truth echoed across a collapsing continent. Machines once feared by millions now sat silent, swallowed by defeat. In May 1945, the fighting ended, and the Luftwaffe fell apart almost overnight. All across Europe, thousands of German aircraft stood abandoned where they had last landed, from familiar fighters to experimental jets and unfinished prototypes. The Allies suddenly found themselves in control of technology that was years ahead of anything they had built, and a quiet race began to capture, study, or destroy every machine before it vanished. In the first days of May 1945, as Germany surrendered, the Luftwaffe no longer existed as a functioning force. Across airfields from Norway to Austria, aircraft sat untouched. Some were complete, others had been stripped for spare parts or damaged by weeks of bombing. Severe fuel shortages, collapsing command structures, and the destruction of essential infrastructure had grounded many units long before the final ceasefire. On the 8th of May, when the capitulation became official, thousands of aircraft remained exactly where they had been left, silent proof of an air arm that once ruled the skies over Europe. In northern Germany, locations such as Flensburg and Lübeck held large groups of grounded aircraft, a mix of flyable machines, damaged wrecks, and incomplete airframes. In Prague, hangars were filled with Messerschmitts, Heinkels, and rare late-war projects. At Rechlin, the main Luftwaffe testing ground, Allied investigators uncovered experimental aircraft, wind tunnel models, and technical papers that revealed the scale of German research into jets and rocket power. The sheer variety of surviving aircraft surprised many Allied officers. Alongside classic fighters such as the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190, they found advanced designs like the Arado AR 234 jet bomber, the Heinkel HE 162, and the remains of projects such as the Junkers Ju 287. Transport and reconnaissance aircraft, including the Junkers Ju 52 and the Heinkel He 111, were scattered across runways. Many had simply been abandoned after running out of fuel in the final weeks. By the time the war ended, the entire Luftwaffe administration had collapsed. Commanders surrendered to whichever Allied forces they encountered. Ground crews often walked away from their positions without receiving official orders. Aircraft maintenance logs, fuel storage sites, and spare parts depots were incomplete, scattered, or destroyed. The Allied Control Commission quickly issued strict regulations. Every German aircraft was grounded, and no German pilot could fly without direct Allied permission. These rules aimed to prevent unauthorized flights, escape attempts, or secret movements of senior officials. A debate soon arose inside Allied leadership about what should be preserved and what should be destroyed. Some officers warned that intact German aircraft were a potential threat, while others saw enormous research value. From the very first days after surrender, the fate of the Luftwaffe's remaining machines became a complex matter of intelligence, logistics, and political strategy. As soon as Germany fell, the Allies launched large recovery programs to seize the Luftwaffe's most advanced aircraft. The United States moved first. On the 9th of May 1945, only one day after the formal surrender, American intelligence teams activated Operation LUSTY, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Led by Colonel Harold Watson, these teams spread out across Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. Their mission was clear. They were ordered to locate advanced aircraft, secure technical files, and transport selected machines to America for detailed testing. At Blackfeld in Germany, American teams secured several intact Messerschmitt Me 262 jets. At Grove Airfield in Denmark, they found Arado jet bombers and a collection of late-war prototypes, aircraft considered valuable were either flown by American pilots or dismantled for shipment to Wright Field in Ohio. Others were sent to Freeman Field in Indiana, where special evaluation units cataloged engines, airframes, and design features. Pilots from the group nicknamed Watson's Whizzers Test flew captured jets under carefully controlled conditions. Their reports shaped early American understanding of swept wings, jet propulsion, and high-speed flight. The British carried out a parallel effort known as Operation Surgeon. Unlike the Americans, who focused mainly on aircraft, the British were equally interested in recruiting the engineers, scientists, and technicians who had designed them. Teams from the Royal Aircraft Establishment entered airfields at Fassberg, Schleswig, Husum, and Rechlin, interviewing surviving personnel and gathering confidential records. Selected German specialists were transferred to British sites for post-war research. At RAF Farnborough, test pilots flew captured aircraft, including the Me-262, to study its performance. The British showed strong interest in the Heinkel He 162, whose lightweight construction offered lessons for future training aircraft. The Soviet Union acted with equal speed. Soviet trophy brigades seized factories and airfields across Saxony, Thuringia, Silesia, and parts of Czechoslovakia. Major production centers such as the Avia works in Prague and the Bf 109 assembly lines in Moravia fell into Soviet hands. Aircraft were shipped east by rail together with tools, machinery, and engineering personnel. At air bases near Moscow and Leningrad, Soviet designers and pilots examined the Me-262 and the Arado R-234, applying their findings to the earliest Soviet jet projects. Competition soon developed among the Allied powers. Each country wanted access to the rarest aircraft, especially prototypes that existed in extremely small numbers. Disagreements broke out over ownership, particularly in central Germany, where American and Soviet forces arrived only days apart. The Allied Control Council attempted to coordinate these efforts, but early signs of Cold War tension were already visible. German personnel also played key roles in these programs. Former pilots, mechanics, and engineers answered technical questions, sometimes under supervision and sometimes through temporary work arrangements. Their expertise helped Allied teams operate complicated systems such as the Jumo 004 jet engine, the BMW 003, and advanced navigation instruments. The Allies documented everything, including photographs, blueprints, flight manuals, and research reports, before deciding what to preserve and what to destroy. By late 1946, the main collection efforts were complete. Dozens of Luftwaffe aircraft had been shipped to the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union for testing. These programs shaped early jet development and prepared the groundwork for the next phase, the destruction of everything that remained. In late 1945, the Allied Control Council declared that Germany could not retain any military aircraft. The most important examples had already been removed. The thousands still scattered across Europe were marked for disposal, turning airfields into vast scrapyards between 1945 and 1948. The order was simple. Every German aircraft, fighters, bombers, transports, trainers, and prototypes had to be eliminated unless specifically kept for research. Sites such as Flensburg, Lübeck-Blankensee, Grove, and Tarnowitz became major disposal centers where Allied crews dismantled and crushed airframes, recycling the metal into Europe's rebuilding industries. At Grove, rows of fighters were stripped apart. In northern Germany, British teams destroyed intact bombers that had survived the war. Even advanced jets were broken down unless they had already been assigned to test programs. Some aircraft were burned in pits. Others were placed on barges and sunk along the coastline. Many of these underwater wrecks remain there today and are sometimes rediscovered by divers. Civilian aviation also faced restrictions. Aircraft such as the Junkers Ju-52, which had been used in both military and commercial roles, were reviewed individually. Some were converted for limited transport duties, but many were still scrapped to comply with Allied policy. In Czechoslovakia, captured aircraft briefly served under new national designations before most were retired and dismantled. France also operated several German aircraft for training and testing, but eventually phased them out as maintenance challenges grew and spare parts became scarce. Historians still debate whether more aircraft could have been saved. Some researchers argue that many rare machines were lost simply because museums had no space to store them. Others point out that Allied priorities centered on demilitarization, not preservation, and the political determination to dismantle Germany's war machine outweighed concerns about historical value. The very small number of surviving Luftwaffe aircraft today is a direct result of this destruction period. Economic pressures also influenced these actions. Europe faced serious shortages of metal, and aluminum and steel from Luftwaffe aircraft were valuable. Recycling airframes supported industries producing consumer goods, construction materials, and machinery needed for recovery. For many local workers, scrapping aircraft provided stable employment during a difficult transition. By 1948, the vast majority of Luftwaffe aircraft no longer existed. Runways once used by major fighter units and bomber formations were cleared or repurposed. Some sites became training grounds for Allied occupation forces. Others returned to farmland or became civilian airports. Yet while most Luftwaffe aircraft were dismantled after 1945, a smaller number found a second life under foreign flags. Beginning in 1946, several countries operated German-designed aircraft for practical reasons and technical interest. These fleets were usually short-lived, but played important roles in early post-war aviation. Czechoslovakia became one of the first nations to reuse German equipment. Factories in Prague, Kunovice, and Letnany held completed aircraft and partially assembled airframes. Engineers finished these machines and placed them into service. The best-known example was the Avia S-199. Although difficult to fly, it served the Czechoslovak Air Force until newer Soviet aircraft replaced it. Several S-199s were later sold to Israel, becoming the first fighter aircraft of the new nation in 1948. Spain also extended the legacy of German fighters. Using agreements from the late 1930s, Spanish factories built the Hispano Aviation HA-1112, a modified Bf-109 equipped with locally produced engines. These aircraft served into the mid-1950s. Decades later, they became widely recognized when used to portray German fighters in films such as the Battle of Britain. Norway operated captured Bf-109s and Arado R-96 trainers during its post-war rebuilding period. These aircraft gradually went out of service as parts became unavailable, but several airframes survived long enough to be restored in the 1960s and 1970s. Civil aviation also benefited indirectly from surviving German technology. The Junkers Ju-52 re-entered passenger service in several countries. In France, the Toucan version was produced at Amiens factories and used in colonial transport roles. Lufthansa briefly operated Ju-52s in the early 1950s before transitioning to newly built aircraft. By the time West Germany created the Bundesluftwaffe in 1956, none of the wartime aircraft were considered for operational service. The new Air Force relied on designs supplied by Allied nations, including the F-84 Thunderstreak, the Canadair Sabre, and later the F-104 Starfighter. Germany entered the jet age with modern equipment, leaving the wartime designs behind. Interest in preserving remaining airframes grew in the second half of the 20th century. Many museum exhibits today come from crash sites, remote lakes, or long-buried wrecks from the Eastern Front. Restoration teams often had to combine components from several aircraft to produce a single display model. In the present day, only a small number of original Luftwaffe aircraft survive. Examples of the Me-262, the Bf-109, the FW-190, and the Arado R-234 can be found in museums from Washington to Berlin. A few privately built replicas appear at air shows, but almost all wartime machines remain grounded. What exists today is only a small fragment of the enormous force once spread across Europe. These survivors stand as quiet reminders of how quickly even the most advanced technology can vanish, and how the post-war world reshaped the legacy of German aviation. If you found this video helpful, watch what happened to German U-boats. After World War II next, a detailed look at how the submarine fleet was captured, examined, and dispersed across the world in the aftermath of the war. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more from World War II Chronicles. Thank you for watching.